I have here the 3 volumes in the Bone Quest for the Spark trilogy. There is Book 1, Book 2, and Book 3. Yeah, the namings of the individual books aren't great. Nobody bothered to think of clever names for the individual books in the trilogy, but together they make up the Bone Quest for the Spark trilogy. Now, I have already talked about each of these books in a separate video. When I finished each book, I made a video reviewing each book on its own. In this video, what I'm hoping to do is talk about the trilogy as a whole, but I anticipate I'm largely going to be repeating myself from the earlier videos. So if you've watched the earlier videos, no need to watch this. And if you watch this, probably no need to go back and watch the earlier videos. You can pick one or the other. Right, so some brief background on the Bone Trilogy. The Bone Trilogy is a sequel to the Bone comics. Now, if you're not familiar with the Bone comics, the Bone comics were a comic book series that ran from the early 90s to the early 2000s, and then was collected in book form, graphic novel form, where it became a staple in elementary school libraries from 2006 onwards. They were a bit after my time, but they became very popular with that generation, and I eventually discovered them when I was in Vietnam, and I used to use them to teach my Vietnamese students English as a second language. We used to read them together. They are, despite the fact that they were after my time, very brilliant comic books, in my opinion, which do a great job of combining whimsical cartoon humor with a more epic story about a battle between good and evil. But it is a story which has a beginning, middle, and an end, and then after the end, that's the end of the story. Well, apparently fans of the story and the publisher were hungry for more, so a sequel was commissioned, which is not by the original author Jeff Smith. It's by Tom Sniegoski, who, this is actually not his first foray into the Bone universe. He also wrote Stupid, Stupid Rat Tales, which was one of the first additional books. Stupid, Stupid Rat Tales itself was later repackaged into Tall Tales and More Tall Tales, which is how it's currently being sold. I mention that because a couple characters from Tom Sniegoski's earlier works on Stupid, Stupid Rat Tales make their way into the 3rd book of the trilogy. So if you care about reading these things in order, it might be worth reading the Tall Tales books first before getting to these books. I didn't know about this, so there are some characters in the 3rd book, Stillman the Dragon and Porter the Turtle. I know these names are a bit ridiculous, who show up in the 3rd book, but I just Googled them to find out their history. Anyways, the books are written by Tom Sniegoski, not Jeff Smith, although Jeff Smith helps out with the illustrations. So as you flip through these books, there are some nice full-color illustrations by Jeff Smith. It might be a little bit of a stretch to call these gorgeous illustrations, but they are nevertheless fun, have a cartoon liveliness to them. Occasionally, the illustrations don't fully match the text, which seems to me to be a slip-up on somebody's part. So, for example, in this illustration here, we have 2 characters in this scene who are clearly not in the scene. I mean clearly according to the narration. So if you read the narration, you know that these 2 characters are very clearly elsewhere where, well, this is happening, but apparently that wasn't communicated to Jeff Smith, or I don't know, somebody messed up. And then apparently nobody realized this before publication. Or if they realized it, they decided they couldn't be bothered to redo the illustration or retouch it or whatever was needed to do to get these two characters out. It's a minor thing, all told, I know, but I'm bringing it up because these types of minor things are an indication of the amount of care that is put into a book like this before publication. Is this something where the editors and the illustrator and the writer are working meticulously to get the story just right? Or is this something that just gets rushed out because there's an assumption that there's a ready audience there? There are a few indications, that illustration is one of them, there are a few others, that this is something that is rushed out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me talk about what this is. So it's not a comic. The original Bone series was a comic. This is not a comic. It's a YA novel, which looks like a comic from the outside, but is mostly text. And you can see when I'm flipping through this, there's not a picture on every page. There's a picture, I don't know, once every 3 chapters or something. As you're reading this, you quite often wish for more pictures. Both because you want to see the Jeff Smith's artwork, and because sometimes the text on its own gets a little bit boring. You would love to see a little picture to liven things up. The text itself, like the prose style, is serviceable. It's not magical. It's not wonderful. It's a little bit plodding, and goes with a lot of cliches. I don't know how many other readers experience this. I quite often found, as I was reading this, I had to struggle to get my mind to focus on the text. You know the type. You get to the end of the page and you think to yourself, oh, geez, I let my mind wander while I was reading that. I actually didn't absorb any of that narrative. I better go back and reread that. Which I don't normally find with YA books. I normally find that with like textbooks or more difficult books. Now, who knows? It could have been me. Maybe this is a time in my life when I'm distracted by a number of things, so I've got my inner monologue is working into overdrive and causing me to lose focus. But I suspect that is also probably just because the text, the prose is a little bit plodding. I don't know. Let me know what your experience with this book was. But yeah, as far as the actual story itself, takes place a little bit after the original Bone story. There are a few cameo appearances by characters that we know from the original Bone comic. For example, the 2 stupid rat creatures are somewhat awkwardly shoehorned into the quest. Might get around to talking about that a little bit later. Roderick, the raccoon, whose parents were eaten by these 2 stupid rat creatures in the original Bone comic. You may remember he was one of the orphaned animals, if you've read the comic. He is one of the characters. We also get, in the 3rd book, the mountain lion Rockjaw from the original Bone comic. And here is Stillman the dragon, who from Tall Tales, and he apparently also makes a brief appearance in the Bone comic in Crown of Thorns. As we flip through it, there are various other brief cameos. For example, the story starts off with Grandma Ben and Thorn, who appear at the very beginning of the book, immediately to get taken out by this sickness, which is going through the valley, and then recover from the sickness at the end of the book and otherwise have nothing to do with the narrative, but they do make a brief cameo. And there's a handful of other characters who make a brief cameo as well. I won't go through all of them now. Excuse me. But the main characters are mostly new characters. So we have 3 new bones. Percival, the Bone Explorer, and his nephew and niece, Barclay and Abby, who are new characters from Boneville, who get sucked into the quest. And Tom Elm and Randolph, the former Yinny Van priest, and this motley assortment makes up our new crew who are going on the new quest. If you don't have to go far in the online reviews of this book, Goodreads or Reddit or Amazon, to see that the fans of this book were disappointed that more of the original characters didn't come back. I mean, who wants these characters, right? We want to see the original Bone cousins, Phone Bone, Smiley Bone, Phony Bone. We want to see Thorn and Grandma Ben, and we want to see the original characters back. But for better or for worse, this trilogy is mostly focused on new characters. By the time I got to the end of the trilogy, I've decided that, on balance, this was the right choice. If for no other reason, then this new author, Tom Sniegoski, does not really have the magic touch that Jeff Smith did. And if you reread the original Bone comics, the balance between a comic tone and a serious tone, I think is, for the most part, 1 or 2 lapses aside, pretty much masterfully done. And very genuinely funny. Jeff Smith can recreate this cartoony humor very well. Tom Sniegoski cannot. Now, we get some whimsical setups. Like, for example, there's a whimsical setup when the characters in Book 2 join up with some bears to steal honey from a beehive. Now, that has cartoon whimsy written all over it. And a few more things like that, which give this trilogy an air of whimsy and fun. But although the setup is interesting, the execution is a bit boring, plodding. The jokes never really land. There's attempts at humor, but it's not great. And so by the time you get done reading this, you think to yourself, okay, it's probably just as well that this author didn't attempt to try his hand at recreating the great dynamic between Phony Bone, Phone Bone, and Smiley Bone. It just would have come off flat, and I think it would have left the reader thinking, these are not the characters I grew to love in the original comic. So, yeah. He's creating his own characters, and mostly his own characters, and to the extent he's borrowing characters from the original comic, like Roderick the raccoon. They are characters who were so minor in the original comic that they're largely undefined. So this way, when he's creating flat characters, at least he's not destroying the characters from the original comic. He's creating his own flat characters. The first book is the setup book, and it's loaded with YA cliches. So Tom is a 12-year-old boy who is stuck on the turnip farm. He dreams of adventure, and he wants to go into the capital city and become a captain of the guard for Queen Thorn. But his parents tell him to quit dreaming. He's just a turnip farmer, and that is his destiny. So I'm sure you can think of 100 YA books or Star Wars or whatever that conform to this setup. Yeah, we're going with these cliches. And then the two twins here, whose parents have disappeared on a journey and are believed to be dead, but the two twins believe that their parents are still out there somewhere. So we're setting up another story arc here. Or the Vanayan priest, whose wife and daughter were killed by rat creatures and who is just drinking away his sorrow. I know this is a little heavy for a kid's book, but obviously his story arc is that he's going to find redemption and regain his purpose. So with these very obvious story arcs being set up so obviously, you think to yourself, okay, it's YA, we're going in for cliches, it's a little bit lazy, but at least we know what we're going for here. I was somewhat surprised then to see how badly those story arcs were bungled by the time we got to the end of the third book. I mean, it's set up so clearly, and yet the priest here, I don't think really ever gets closure on his wife and daughter being horrifically killed by rat creatures by the end of the book. I noticed in the first book that although it said his wife and daughter were killed by rat creatures, he did not come home to find their dead bodies. He came home to find that the house was empty. And I thought, no dead bodies. Okay, we may be finding the wife and child later by the end of this trilogy. But no, maybe they are dead, huh? Wife and child are really dead. He sees visions of them when he's dreaming. So they're in some sort of afterlife that he wants to join them in, kind of like that Gladiator movie, if you catch that reference. So then you expect that by the end of the book, okay, maybe he sacrifices himself so he can go to see his wife and daughter. Nope. So his wife and daughter are somewhere out there in the afterworld waiting for him, I guess. But at the end of this book, he is still... Well, what is he doing at the end of this book? The quest is over. He's been given purpose by joining in this quest, but now the quest is over. Is he going to go back to drinking? Or is this newfound sense of purpose going to carry forward into his new life where he does what now? Tom Elm, the turnip farmer boy who dreamed of adventure, goes back to being a turnip farmer. We end the book without still finding the parents of these two twins, Barkley and Abby, although, let me see if I can find the picture. Ted the Bug, another cameo from the original Bone series, does show up, and he mentions that the two parents are waiting to be rescued. But then the book ends. We don't actually get to the rescue and the reunion with their parents. So, yeah, stuff is very clearly set up and then completely bungled in the conclusion. But because stuff is just left hanging, I think that this was supposed to be the start of a much longer series. Now, I haven't found this written explicitly on the internet anywhere, although I haven't looked too hard either. Maybe this is out there somewhere. Some information on the publishing history or the original ambitions about this. If somebody can find a website or something to point to, let me know. But I suspect that this was it was a self-contained trilogy, kind of, although the threads are left hanging at the end. But it was also, I suspect, a trial run to see what kind of market there was going to be for YA-themed Bone books. And I suspect the publishers wanted to launch a much longer series that would have just gone on indefinitely, like the Animorphs series or some of these other YA series, that there would have been like 30 books in the Bone universe. But perhaps sales of this didn't do well, and they decided not to go forward on that. As much as these books are underwhelming, there's a part of me that got a little bit of pleasure just by returning to the Bone universe. And I got some pleasure out of seeing Jeff Smith's artwork again. And I thought, the idea is still there. Okay, the execution is a little bit plodding. But the idea of having these fun cartoon characters with this larger battle between good and evil, still there. It's still working, at least on the basic level, even if it's not flying. Even if it's not, if it doesn't really take off to greater things. I kind of feel a little bit of a disappointment that maybe this didn't work, launching a larger series. On the other hand, you do wonder what would they have done with a larger series. So this book starts off with the Valley once more being in trouble with a battle between good and evil. There is a dark, mysterious force which is trying to take over the Valley. It is the Nyat. I think I'm pronouncing that right, N-A-C-H-T, which is trying to take over the valley, this dark, spreading darkness. So, yes, the conflict between this mysterious, powerful, dark force and our heroes going on the quest is largely a retread of the original story from the Bone comics, or at least the setup. I mean, on the one hand, that's what you do in sequels, right? You just repeat the formula. On the other hand, as a reader, you're like, oh, okay, this again. I don't know. Would it have worked better to do something on a smaller scale? So, for example, had these people go and explore another corner of the valley where there was something else interesting happening, rather than just reboot the same conflict. Maybe had the series continued, they would have done other things in other corners of the valley. Or maybe they just didn't have any ideas. Maybe had the series continued, it would just have been another battle for control of the valley between the sources of good and the sources of evil. Sorry, forces. Forces of good and the forces of evil. And, that maybe they just didn't really even have any good ideas. It's a motley crew that gets assembled for this quest, and they are assembled by a force known as the Dreaming. It was a little bit unclear to me how they were. So there was a sleeping sickness, which was hit all the other characters of the valley, or most of the other characters of the valley, except for our heroes. I thought maybe this was a little bit unclear, but I guess the explanation is that the Dreaming gave some sort of protection to these heroes so that they wouldn't fall asleep. Exactly how the Dreaming did this, or if the Dreaming could protect some of its heroes from not falling asleep, why didn't the Dreaming do this to everyone in the valley? Some of these questions are a little bit vague. There are forces with undefined powers here, which I guess that's common in a YA fantasy story. You just have to go with it to a certain extent. So they are assembled by the Dreaming to go on this quest, and the Dreaming has handpicked all of them. so to speak. They are all chosen ones. Now, Tom Elm, the 12-year-old boy, is chosen as the leader, despite the fact that he's only a 12-year-old boy, and there are a couple of adults on this journey. Percival and Randolph, the Vinian priest, who would seem to make better leaders. And indeed, the story has a difficult time following its own conceit. So Tom Elm is supposed to be the leader, but whenever there's a crisis, the adults start barking orders. And occasionally Tom has a good idea or makes a suggestion, but you never quite buy that he's the leader of the quest, despite the fact that he's supposed to be the chosen one. And you're kind of waiting to find out, why is he the chosen one? And you get to the end of the book, and he's the chosen one because the dreaming chose him. So as a baby, you find out when he was still in the womb, the dreaming gave him a piece of the original spark and chose him. Why him? Why as a baby? Never explained. So because Tom does have a piece of the original spark in him, he does eventually, once all the pieces of the spark are assembled, become this luminous figure. And then he starts referring to himself as, I am the light, which, okay, I guess we're going for the Jesus symbolism here. I don't know why. I don't know if the author is religious and wanted to do a Chronicles of Narnia type religious allegory here, or if they're of the opinion that sprinkling in religious symbolism makes the book more meaningful or deeper. I don't know. But yeah. So Tom Elm, the characters here, I mentioned before, this happens once the spark is complete. They have to go around and find all the pieces of the spark first. So this is yet another fantasy story where they have to go around to a lot of different places and collect pieces of the MacGuffin. So it's kind of like a video game in that sense. They're going on this quest to various places, which is why they end up going to the beehive in book 2, is because a piece of the MacGuffin is in the beehive. Now, the Dreaming has also selected the 2 stupid rat creatures from the original Bone comic to be part of the quest. Now, if you remember these guys from the original Bone comic, and if you've read the original comic, how could you not? They're not good guys. They're comic relief. They're kind of lovable in the sense that they're comic. But they, even at the end of the original comic, they never really get a full redemption to being good guys. So, yeah. They're shoehorned into this quest rather awkwardly. They're kind of forced into it. And throughout the quest, they are comic, and they do have a few funny moments, but you wonder, why are they on the quest? Of course, the real reason is the authors wanted to add in some comic relief here with these 2 characters, and wanted to add some recognizable characters from the original Bone comic. But the in-universe reason about why did the Dreaming add them to the quest, I kept waiting for them to have a big hero moment where they would do something that none of the other characters could do and save the day and make it so that, if they hadn't been on this quest, it would have failed. But because there was this one thing that only they could have done, we find out why they're justified as being on this quest. But nope, that doesn't pay off. In fact, there's a lot of, we never do get a real good reason, an in-universe reason for why the Dreaming chose, why is the raccoon on this quest, right? Yeah.